So this actually question is directed at you, Liset, but perhaps we could put it to the whole panel. Other than funding, what are the biggest barriers for you to do more impact measurement work? Or maybe it is mostly funding.
Yeah. My immediate reaction was it's often mostly funding, but especially because we realize it takes time to measure impact, so you need time. So funding. So I think what I would like to discuss with Tim after this mentorship, after this experience, is that I think it should be part of every activity we do. So maybe we should also, for funding, have that, as we do for communications, have a small part for measuring impact for every activity. But another barrier that came to mind was that I was hoping that maybe OpenUp could tell more about, or we'll ask them later, how to integrate this in your organizational structure. So I was thinking more also in the way of having a format or something, like which question do you ask before starting setting up an activity, and which questions do you ask when you're in the middle or at the end? Like you have some kind of, maybe the questions you brought up and were also part of our mentorship, like, what is the change? Who are you trying to reach? That's to have a simple format for it and use it for every. So it's not very much a barrier, but just something we need to do, start doing.
Yeah, time is the first thing. And so in our work, we not only have this tool, but we have the journalistic work. So we are tracking a lot of things from month to month. And it's really important that to be easy to track. So it's not always easy to track everything. And what we can track easily every month is the reach. And donors like the number of the reach. So this is what we do. And to have more detailed impact information, what I talked about, it takes time, and we have to step back from the daily, monthly, weekly work.
Sorry, I missed the question.
The barriers. What are the barriers to impact work, including funding?
Yeah, I think if you're not tracking any metrics, that's obviously a big red flag. Obviously a metric is not going to be your final impact, but I think it is important to have some kind of metrics, quantitative and qualitative, that you are tracking. I think quantitative is quite easy. You can set up Google Analytics, so if you have a tool or a website, and you can see number of users, returning users, where they're connecting from, all of that kind of stuff. But I think you mentioned the Slack channel with achievements, and I think it's a little bit of an internal motivation for us to see what we're achieving, and we're not just heads down deep in, say, spreadsheets working with data, and we don't actually ever see what the outcome is. But I think it's also then to reach out to the partners that you work with to try and get testimonials and perhaps like positive feedback from them that is not a number. You want to try Gabby often speaks of an emotional hook. You want to get that human element of the impact that you've created and then back that up with the data. And then that hopefully, in theory, can address the barriers. But I would say even the theory of impact, it's not set in stone. I think it's something that you should allow yourself to be able to adapt. And I think yesterday I was mentioning agile methodologies, and agile methodology is a really nice way to always keep reflecting on your activities, your outcomes, your outputs, and then keep adjusting them as your project goes forward. Because perhaps you did decide that, okay, our activities, we hosted a workshop, but then no one attends your workshop. And then that falls flat. So then you have to go back and think, what is a different activity we could do that aligns better? So I had some that I tried to do based on Átlátszónet. So an example might be activity, what did we do? We published 10 investigative reports and we filed 50 FOI requests. And then the output might be that 100,000 articles were read with a 80% success rate. And an outcome could perhaps be that citizens used, I apologize if I mispronounce this, but kimitut, citizens used Commuter to file 1,000 plus FOI requests, and whistleblowers shared new leads, and eventually it perhaps even led to an official being investigated. But again, I think it's something that you have to keep reiterating on. It's not something that I would say, once you have it written down once, then that's how you go forward. I think even our approach and what I presented there is, I want to say, a third or fourth iteration of us measuring our own impact.
How do you go about this? Like, do you have meetings on this, or do you have like a obligation to fill in a form before you start, or something like that? Like, how does it look in everyday work?
Is this one working? Oh, it is. I think so. So it's obviously very project or client specific, and funder. I think sometimes funders have requirements which are quite tick boxy, so you just have a list of things that you need to achieve, you achieve them or you don't, tick them off, cool. But I think with the client, it's about really in those kickoff meetings and early phase kind of things is creating a shared understanding of what you are trying to achieve. Because then if later on down the line you feel that things are not going in the direction you thought you were, or perhaps often the case is clients get back to you and suddenly they're angry or frustrated because the project's not going the way that they thought, and then it makes it useful to have those kickoff meetings from the beginning where we all sat around the table and decided together, this is what we want to achieve, these are the types of impacts we want to reach, and so then we can bring it back to that and say, okay, but we wanted to achieve X, Y, Z, and now you're talking about A, B, C, so where did the disconnect happen? And again, that's why I think it's always important to just be flexible, agile, and remain open to change, I suppose. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. And yeah, at my society, we have a few Slack channels as well dedicated to impact. And I think they are really useful to, on the day-to-day, have a bit of a win and recognise those. But also when you are writing a funding report or application, to be like, here is one place to go where you can see, rather than like go through loads and loads of different messages, like here is a place to go and see in the last 6 months. So yeah, great tip. And I think also a place, even if it's qualitative, to spot patterns, as you say, that you might find a new measurement as a result of somebody saying, oh, I used it for this thing that we had no idea people were using it for, and now we start looking for it. Great. Actually, should I go to one in the room? I appreciate that some people might have put their questions up here, and so you can put your hand up and read your Slido question if you want to. But unless there's another one in the room, I could go to Slido. Oh yeah, sure. One here, middle.
Can I ask two quick questions? One is, how do you assess uncertainty? Because you might assume a certain stability in the external world, and actually things go backwards, become more difficult, and you might not have achieved your original goals, but you've actually still had impact because you've kind of counteracted something. And if anyone's heard of the report No Royal Road on advocacy evaluation by the Centre for Innovation in Advocacy, it's mind-blowingly good, but it'll probably make you have a rethink. That's my first question. The second one is, how do you track the impact of your requests on organisations? So in the UK, for example, there's a thing called a publication scheme where if a body regularly gets requests about certain sorts of information, it should think about actually just publishing that by default. Are you tracking how the recipients of these requests change their behaviour, rather than just having to headbutt your wall by having to put in the requests the same ones every year? Thank you.
Great. So that was the first one being tracking impact when the situation around you is changing and maybe going backwards. And then the second one being, what was the second one? I instantly forgot. Yes, the recipients of your FOI requests, they may be changing their practice as a result of the work that you do.
Yeah, I can think of two examples maybe that answers your question, but I think the fundamental is that because things are going to change all the time. We could write a handbook on how to request public information in South Africa, but as I said, it's not that simple. For those that don't know, South Africa, we've become a bit desensitized, I think, to corruption in South Africa. It's kind of like par of the course every day. Silly example I can give is I have a friend who's from France who's now living in Cape Town, and they didn't have water for a few days, and she couldn't understand why everyone wasn't in the street protesting. And from our perspective, we have ex-presidents who are blatantly corrupt and they haven't been held to account. So there's this desensitization where we obviously don't think that protesting is going to get us water if a very clear example of a president being corrupt hasn't been held to account. But I think, so yeah, remaining flexible and agile, an example would be we requested some information and they very strategically, well, like I said earlier, one, they throw the POPI Act in your face to say, oh no, you can't get this because it has personal information, which it doesn't, because it's public information. Or they will send you a response the day before the deadline and say, you need to submit this information by tomorrow at 8 a.m. and you have to pay 100 Rand, and you only see the email the next morning, and so then you have to start the process again. I think another way to, an example would be we requested information from the Department of Water and Sanitation on wastewater treatment works in South Africa, and we just got blue ticked, essentially, got no response. And so our adaptation there, or the thing that we had to suddenly switch to, is building web scrapers so that we could then go and scrape the information from their websites, with the risk that that's perhaps something we're not meant to be doing, but our thinking was it's public data, and the fact that they're not giving it to us through this official channel, we have to now adapt and then find another way to do it.
I can answer the second question. So there are other non-profits who are counting this, that how the institutions are answering. But so in Hungary, the main way is that how the law is set up, and they have to follow it. And so this is what I told previously as well, that if they don't want to answer, they will fight. And it's not about really the format, but it's about the content. And it will not change, because if they don't want to be something to be public, they will fight against as long as they can. So there are numbers that how many institutions are not answering, or how many institutions not answering fully. But the real question is that if the real questions are answered. And but it's really important that there are a lot of freedom of information requests in the Hungarian system, which shouldn't be a freedom of information request, because by the law it should be on the website on these institutions. But it's not there. And this is the first step, that if there will be more and more freedom of information requests, the institutions have to understand that it's easier to go by the law and put it online.
I think I don't have anything to add to that, because it sounds familiar for us in the Netherlands. It's Open State Foundation who does research on how long it takes for an authority to answer freedom of information requests. And it's more for this impact measurement that I think we work with, trying to get an idea of how things are now and what we want to change, that we can measure whether we're actually achieving that change or not. So we use, for example, the research that's done by others to say, okay, this is how it's now, and we're doing these activities, and the outcome should be that some behavior of a public authority changes from this to that, and see if we can make that happen. So I don't know if
just one thing to add, that digitalization is something that helps our work, because 10 years ago it was easy to say that we don't have this data, it's too much work to give you out, because we have to scan them, and then and it will be too big and it needs too many hours. Nowadays, when they say that we cannot give you, we know that it can't be true, because everything is digitized, if it's something from the last years. So the technology is really on our side, and it makes harder for the institutions not to give out information.
That exact argument is used the other way around in the Netherlands. They say it's too much information because of digitalization in order to keep track of all the requests, being able to answer.
Question at the back.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your experience. I just had a question. How do you translate like some qualitative data to something meaningful to like measure this impact?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's a tough one. I think, okay, impact's not easy to track. I think that's obvious. And it really comes down to communicating what you have been tracking over time. And so I think, I'm trying to think of an example, but you could essentially, like we had an example where it wasn't necessarily that we had an idea of this is the impact we're going to track. So it goes back to that example with the Department of Water and Sanitation. And the real project there was to help investigative journalists who were writing articles about the state of wastewater treatment works in South Africa. And we were collecting the data for them, building it into a GIS mapping visualization where you could see the different wastewater treatment works and how so many of them are just completely unmonitored. You don't even know if they're good, bad, excellent. And the end result, which was something we never planned for, was that the city of Cape Town, for example, because of the stories that came out and the, I suppose, outcry that caused, or the sort of social, there was a bit of a social like build-up behind these articles, and it eventually resulted in the city suddenly changing their story, publishing water results, and things that they had never done before, and suddenly that was the impact. But it was never something that we had initially intended. So there is a tension, I think, between the very like waterfall approach of funders, where they want to know what you're going to do in year 1, 2, 3, but you have no idea, and they might ask for very quantitative metrics and that kind of stuff, but suddenly something happens and there's a massive social change, and then that becomes the impact or the achievement that you get. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
So we have always like some KPIs that we can use to track like the change, but if we have some stories to tell, some qualitative data, how can we use them to compare them with the KPIs, or do you work with this qualitative data in another way?
So, yeah, I think they could be interrelated. So for example, you might say that if you just reported a quantitative metric of, I'm just going to use an example now, but 60% of police officers at a particular police station, male police officers, were fired because of gender-based violence. If I just gave you the number of 60% male police officers fired, cool. But if I told you that, wow, this police, if you had it in a more narrative sense, that we had a police station where a vast majority of male police officers were sexually harassing their female colleagues, and the police department's response was to then fire all of the male police officers and only hire female police officers. And the end result, which is again not something that was anticipated, is that suddenly service delivery just went up. And that's that weird connection between you had a quantitative number, but now you've given it that emotional human element, that what does it actually mean in the end that you fired 60% of male police officers?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Great, thank you everybody. I think that actually answered our top question on Slido as well, and we've just got to 1:45, so it's time for another break.